Let's go ahead and do a little bit of introductions for people that might be newer and be like, who are these people? Why am I here? What are we talking about? So I'm David. I have Elle here as well. And we're two of the founders of JumpstartGo. And we really focus on helping insurance agents double, even triple their production, fire their lead vendor, ditch the smiling and dialing, or as I call it, frowning and drowning forever through organic marketing strategies. So we founded JumpstartGo back in 2018, focused specifically around insurance agents, the insurance industry. Elle and I both come from marketing consulting backgrounds prior to that, but we are licensed agents. We're running and have a life agency ourselves as well right now too. So get to test a lot of things out that we then get to teach within our programs too. This Facebook group that you guys are joining us in, the Marketing for Insurance Agents group, is now over 34,000 insurance agents across the country, all lines of insurance, captive, independent. It's a place to come, collaborate, to learn, mastermind, share resources, all in something, a positive atmosphere, not complaining, not bashing carriers, really focused just around growing your business, right? And love that you guys have been a part of this. And we really made it for a resource for you guys to learn and to dive in as a part of that group. So thanks for you guys for being a part of that. We've been blessed to have worked with close to around 600 different insurance agents and agency owners inside of our programs, like the Closers Click, help them put these things in place to grow and scale. Generated around 3.5-4 million through social media over the last few years. And we specialize in teaching our clients how to grow through organic strategies and really leverage, especially like social media, for example, and strategic referral partner relationships. So with that, let's rock and roll, as I think we got a really fun one, and a really one that I find agents struggle around on this. So let's tee up today's training. So today we're going to dive into a topic that's a bit of a tightrope, all right? Should you talk about politics on social media? To be, not to be, yes or no? We'll find out. It's a question that many agents struggle with, especially with upcoming elections, right? So let's explore whether discussing politics is a smart move for your brand or if it's something that could put your business at risk. So let's go ahead and join. So let's talk about the pros and the cons of political content. Can you go ahead and hop in for us?
Yeah. So, well, first off, I guess like exploring the reason like why you feel the need to post political content to begin with, you know? So there are some pros and cons. So for people that are using social media to build their brand and generate business, like it's very hot button topics, right? It's a good way to get engagement going on your profile if you're kind of leaning into controversy or controversial topics. So that would be a pro, right? If you're kind of leaning into controversy and politics, you can increase engagement and visibility that way. But you might run the risk of damaging your brand or alienating some of your audience, or even maybe half of your audience, if you're not doing this in such a way that, you know, it makes people feel like, oh, I don't want to work with them because they don't align with my views, or they came across X, Y, and Z way. So that'd be a con there. So for people that want to use politics in their social media content, is there a middle ground? Like, David, do you see that there's a way to both get engagement off of things that are relevant and happening, but without alienating like half of your audience? Can you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it comes with a little finesse on that, but I see people really do a good job on it sometimes, especially when it comes from a perspective of humor or talking more on kind of important points, especially if we're talking about insurance, how a couple things might affect the industry, whether it's kind of policy, some of those changes and stuff as well. And I find if I'm coming from a perspective kind of humor to get conversations going, or like not, and especially a place where I'm having just like a straightforward discussion and where it's not heated with emotions, and where especially when it, you know, kind of delves into like name calling or, hey, this other side and it's like us versus them type stuff. When it's not coming from those perspectives, I think it can be very effective, right? Like, you know, that's where I see people done quite well of just using some memes. Like, you know, if it's, you know, a cat sleeping with, you know, a gun because they're in Springfield, Ohio, and you're just kind of use the meme like, hey, it doesn't really matter what side of the fence you're on or whatever, like we can kind of laugh, we can have fun, and we can kind of still have important discussions. So I do think it's something that's very difficult on social media, as it's not really designed, I think, as much to have kind of productive conversations as much especially because things get lost in text and don't have tonality. Sarcasm is really hard to detect. And, it's really hard to feel like, oh, I'm actually listening to points and responding back, when it's so easy to delve into just either blocking someone or, hey, into name calling and stuff like that, which nothing gets accomplished there. So I think that's some of the things I see. Elle, what are you kind of seeing as far as kind of effectively being able to discuss that without maybe hurting or damaging or alienating?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for, even making the decision on whether you're going to post anything political to begin with or not. And so you don't have to post about politics at all to have a successful social media strategy. I think it's kind of first thing of just determining why you're bringing politics into the conversation and into your social media marketing. And so, David, why do you think people would choose to bring politics into social media marketing even to begin with?
Okay, so not positively, I think they choose to bring it in because they feel really strong a certain way, right? I think a lot of people do, right? That's, kind of the nature of it. A lot of people just aren't quite as middle ground. It's I'm one way or the other, and yes, no, especially because we have a two-party system, right? And that would be a whole separate side comments. But I feel like a lot of people feel like it's authentic. They're not authentically them unless they're discussing this, they're voicing this, and it's very important to them. So I think they think if they make their opinion heard, then maybe that will influence or affect others. Now, I will say I have almost never seen someone switch their mindsets or it really end up as a super productive conversation through social. So I think there's much better platforms and ways of doing that. But I think that's one of the reasons people do it, bring it up in the first place, is because they feel like that they really need to, and then it's really important to them that they make their voice heard on there and stuff. But as far as on a business side of why people would potentially bring up and around this is the virality of it and the trendiness of it, and the fact that this is going to get engagement. It is going to get people responding one way or the other, especially if I lean it one direction or other. So that's where, if I can kind of play the middle and the line there, I can take advantage of trending topics and conversations. I can get a lot of engagement, which helps my business and stuff in other ways as well. And, I think that's a big factor because it's going on, because people are discussing it. It kind of stinks to not be able to participate in something that is trending and effective. If something's a trend that's going on, we all want to hop on, we want to make our meme around it, we want to talk about it and discuss it. And so people want to do the same thing with politics.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I heard there. So first is that just from the engagement standpoint of it, can definitely increase your visibility. Talked about that as far as jumping on trends, obviously on social media and social media marketing. That can definitely help with boosting your visibility, more people just seeing your content. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, we actually talked all about engagement and ways that you can increase your engagement, increase your visibility on social media. So that's huge. That by itself is definitely valuable. And then the second is values. And so that's definitely something that we teach our clients to be authentic and be genuine of, who you are on social media, because that actually can work in your favor when people see you as an authentic person, as a real person that they can trust. And, we all have values, and for a lot of people, their political views is an extension of their values, and something that is very deeply important to them. So what are ways that agents can bring this in? So let's say, I think kind of two different things here. One is engagement based. So what are ways that agents can kind of ride the trend and use this to their advantage as far as getting more visibility, more engagement without alienating their audience?
Yeah, and because that's definitely the con, right? I don't want to polarize my audience. I don't want to lose people paying attention to me just because they feel a different way, maybe politically than me, but I can still help ensure them. I can still protect them. I still want them to see me as an authority, someone they can trust for those decisions, regardless if maybe we don't agree on politically, we don't align. And, don't want to damage that brand or reputation over something that, honestly, in a lot of cases, isn't something that my business is a hill I want to die on for my business, right? And so I think that comes to the middle ground, right? What's some ways to acknowledge political topics without taking a side, and kind of thinking like, hey, how can I bring this topic more from a middle ground where it's not so aligned to one perspective? And especially if it's to be something beneficial and helpful to my audience, because it's going to affect either their healthcare, it's going to affect changes in the industry, something like that. And so and I guess the question there being like, how can agents use controversial topics without alienating their audience? Because it's not just politics, although that's what we're discussing tonight. There's a lot of different either controversial or very triggering type of content, and topics that, how do we navigate these, right? And of course, we're talking about political as a part of tonight. And so we want to be able to like leverage these safely, effectively, and feel like, hey, we know how to do it. So we don't have to just completely stay away from it because we're scared of the outcomes there. So, and then obviously, like, how do I bring up responding to people in this? If my comments are going off and getting super heated or getting really rough, like, do I just leave it and let those comments go in there? Do I moderate? That's where people are like, hey, I want to be able to say what I want to say without you like, either blocking me or like deleting my comments and stuff like that. So I think some of the things that agents can leverage, and we'll dive into each of these, is neutral language. And so that's really powerful. A focus on education as a part of this, not singling out individuals or affiliations, which is huge. When I'm not making this to them, especially when people align themselves with certain labels, because those are labels that I would describe myself as, if I'm attacking that label in some way or kind of negatively about that label, then that feels personal to me, even though it's maybe not intended personal, right? Lastly, avoiding name calling. I don't know why it's so common now that stuff is devolved into that, that I think that's probably one of the downsides of social. It's so easy to do that, but honestly, that's something that I see happening a lot there as well. So Elle, let's talk about neutral language. What does that mean? What does it mean to use neutral language?
Yeah, so I think kind of goes back to the emotional side of it, of things kind of like getting heated, and it's kind of like what you've already mentioned as far as focusing on facts and education. I think it is really important with that, but not letting your language becoming like, I always think about it like using hyperbole. So using things like never or always, like those types of things that like start getting on spectrums. I think about this as far as like just in communication in general, as far as like if I'm upset about something and I'm like, well, you always do this, type of thing. Like that's not very neutral language. That's not in the middle language. I'm taking a hyperbole of saying like, I feel very frustrated about a certain circumstance. And so I'm trying to really emphasize my point by saying like, well, this always happens, but that's not really true.
Some of this advice also goes towards marriage, guys, and relationships. Using hyperbole in relationships, you always don't take out the trash or come home late. Don't hyperbole in a lot of situations in your life is probably not ideal.
So I think that that's an example of kind of using neutral or middle ground language of trying to effectively communicate. I will also say, and this, David, you made this point too, trying to prove a point in comments or trying to like battle something back and forth with somebody in comments is usually nobody wins that game. I think people kind of get some sort of like entertainment value out of just like going into the comments. So you as an agent and somebody that is a content creator, you want to think about not battling with people or trying to feel like you're winning a conversation or trying to win people over to your ideas or like win people over to your side. So that's something is like being neutral. I think if you can kind of have that lens of like, I'm not trying to like win anybody over through the content that I'm posting or the comments or the conversation that I'm having with people on social media. Because I mean, David, have you ever had an experience where your opinion's been changed through like random comments on a social media thread?
No, and I don't think anybody really has.
Have you experienced a change of heart from like comment threads where people are like going back and forth at each other in comments, or like have you had a change of heart? Because I have not. I think that's something that's really important to remember when you're creating content, that you're not going to win people over to your side. So when we're thinking about being neutral, we want to take this lens of like, that's not how people change their minds through threads on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that's ever had effect is face-to-face, in-person conversation, sitting down, having a discussion over a period of time and listening to other person's point of views and someone I know. That can have an effect, right? Someone I don't know on social or maybe just virtually know or ever and stuff, and it's just not that productive. In a lot of cases, winning means we actually in the day really lost, right?
Yeah.
Like, the win isn't, oh, I changed their mind. It's like, hey, I made my point and they stopped responding to me, right? And it's like, what, maybe I got a little dopamine hit from it, but at the end of the day, it didn't really help anything, right? So that neutral language. And I think the biggest thing for agents, because we really focus on this in general, even outside of controversial topics, is the focus on education, right? We want agents to really be seen as an authority, the go-to, that people can know about something changing, so they're up to date on changes in the industry that might affect them, as the trusted advisor. That's really how agents want to position themselves. And so that education is just so much more of a direct and helpful way to even come about some of these discussions than anything. And so I think if I am going to come into something kind of politically related, once again, healthcare is always something that kind of falls into this. I can take an educational approach more so than one candidate versus another candidate, right?
Absolutely. And I think that again, it's not about winning. It's more about education, facilitating conversation, and putting a spotlight on topics that, are, especially if you are focusing on education and things that potentially are going to be affecting your clients and also your business. Those are things that you can put a light on. But again, thinking about that, keeping it neutral, that we're not trying to like win people over one way or another. We're simply providing the education and the information. Absolutely. And then along with that, avoiding like name calling or saying people are stupid or idiots or I can't believe people like think this way. Like that kind of stuff really is very, very unproductive, and it's very, very triggering to people. And
at that point, you've already lost, right? If you're using names, like you've kind of lost all credibility, and like at that point, it's not productive at all. I think if anything, you definitely lost face in like potential clients' eyes if I'm resorted to using names, right? And so like we're all adults here. Hopefully your insurance agent's an adult. You have to be 18 to get licensed, right? So like I think it's being adults and having discussions, right? It's a certain maturity, especially a maturity I would want in an agent, right? And so I think that's big. And also realizing like we may want similar things, but we may disagree on how we think we'll get to those things, right? Which is the more productive conversation, is like, oh, the paths and why one may make more sense than the other, more so than like, hey, it's all about this one thing happening or whatever and stuff. And like, I stand for America's freedom. Well, okay, we may have very different views on America's freedom. I'm not saying I don't stand for freedom, but maybe I disagree on how you view that, right? And when you put yourself as like, oh, anybody who disagrees with me doesn't support this obviously positive thing, then once again, we're alienating and charging people. So and so let's transition this a little bit, because I think we can get into like, okay, people were like, well, okay, then what do I do, right? And so because I want to move into this next thing, like, should I stay away from political content altogether? I mean, obviously that is a path of, I just don't talk politics. Nothing to do with it. I stay away from it. Nothing's discussed on my profile. And yeah, maybe I'm missing some opportunities from it, but I just prefer to keep it simple, not bring anything up around that. But you do feel like, especially like election year, like you're missing out on a lot of different conversations and stuff that you could be having there. So Elle, should I include political content? Because we sometimes get asked this, right? If it aligns with my ideal target audience, and I don't want to work with people on the other side, can I successfully do that? And maybe how should I approach that if that is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, so we do have these conversations with our clients. They do ask us like, actually, like an ideal client for me is somebody that does align with my political views. And my response to that is always like, hey, like if this is the hill you want to die on kind of thing, and you want to create your content that leans heavily into a certain side of the conversation, and that's an ideal client for you, and you're okay alienating the rest of like your audience, like that's what successful marketing does. I mean, successful marketing attracts people that are your right fit clients, and it alienates or it repels the people that are your wrong fit clients. So I also kind of want to flip the other side of the coin. We talked about like this middle ground and staying neutral if you don't want to alienate part of your audience, and how you can do that while still being true with your values and capitalizing on engagement. But you can also make the decision in your marketing, like, hey, like this is the target market that I really want to work with. They have these political leanings. They have these types of points of views. You know what those are. Those are things that you can also speak to. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense to bring that out into your marketing. Still with that, we want to avoid the name calling. We want to avoid things that are negative. We also want to showcase what you stand for instead of what you stand against. So we want to still have more of a positive tone to our content. We've talked about this before, but the algorithm actually rewards content that is positive and gives people more positive feelings than negative feelings. So while things that can be really sort of triggering for people, or really just make them give that all those feels inside, and they're like, oh my gosh, I gotta respond to this right now, or I'm gonna explode, that kind of stuff. Even though that gets lots of engagement, it's just because of those feelings that people have of needing to respond, and the comments kind of blowing up on that kind of stuff. Like the algorithm itself is actually going to reward things that are more positive. So because the social media platforms want people to have positive associations with the platform, the more positive associations they have, the more frequently they keep coming back to the platform. They want people logging into the platform multiple times per day to come to the platform, not that, oh my gosh, I'm writing off social media forever. The world is devolving into chaos. I can't keep logging into the platform anymore. I've had enough. Like, they don't want that. They want people coming back to the platform so that they can keep serving them ads and making money. So the more positive experiences that your content creates, the more that people are interacting with it. Overall, the more engagement and visibility that it's gonna have. So even if you are having, one side that you really want to sort of lean into, how you're talking about things and issues and views, the more that you can talk about what you're standing for instead of what you're standing against, as well as leading with positivity, the better your content's going to perform overall for the long term. David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said, right? Like, it's not in a social platform's best interest to get people to the point where they're just like, listen, I'm not using this anymore, because then they go out of business, right? They want to make money, they want to keep people on. So they also know threading the line, but ultimately keeping people, good experiences overall, keeps people there, right? At the end of the day, listen, I'm here to help people. I don't care about the political leanings. I'm going to help them get the right Medicare plan in place. I'm going to help them get their life insurance in place, their car insurance. So for me, if the money's green, that's all that, it doesn't matter to me on their political leanings, right? I'm going to do my best job. I'm going to help people. And that's why most of us got into this. So for most people, the easiest answer, and the answer probably makes the most sense, is no. Is not really delving into the political content unless it's, maybe just some humor and not actual discussion and stuff like that. The easiest answer is probably no, especially if it's not going to affect who I particularly want to do business with and stuff on that. Now, I'm not saying that the part of this discussion is that it doesn't have to be that way, but for most people, it's just too hard not to lean into one way or the other and get aggressive, and then it gets down a bad path, right? So politics have no place in business, but I would say they do have some, right? Because there's outfall and effects of politics that affect our businesses, no matter which line of insurance we're in. And so I think there's different areas that have those effects that we can talk about and discuss in a productive manner. Not so much like the candidates, but more discussing a couple of the issues and how those affect things in our cause. What might make a change to Medicare, to the healthcare, what might affect different things around the P&C world, or changes to life insurance or estate planning. My dad's an estate planning attorney, deals with charitable trust and finances and everything around there. And there's significant changes that happen to that affect what's taxable or not taxable people when estates pass and all these kinds of things, right? And so those are great topics to talk about. Maybe they lean a little bit towards politics on what kind of effects they have, but it's not going to get as heated as like, which candidate are you supporting, right? And so I do think there can be some places for that. And, complete name calling has no place in politics. And then Holly Matt, like, I think that's great, right? That was the exact example of like, I'm picking something that, if basically anybody doesn't agree with this might be negative, but we may disagree on the point of that, or that like, hey, the world ends one way or the other, but we may not like the outcomes one way or the other personally, right? So moving on there, like, okay, so we talked about if we do take a hard stance, lead with positivity, more showcase what I stand for, not necessarily against, and more talk about those things, especially through education. But you mentioned like, what if something goes off the rails? How should agents handle the backlash if a controversial post doesn't go as planned? Now can they turn it into a positive lead generation opportunity?
Well, I think one of the things that actually this works great, from a marketing standpoint, if you successfully pull it off. So let's say you do alienate some of your audience. Maybe you do say some things that you kind of regret on social media. There's a couple different ways that you could handle that. I mean, you could you can always delete stuff, and if it's on your post, you can delete your own comments. You can delete comments that people say, so there's always that recourse as far as having control over sort of the comments and posts and all of that. But things that I've seen work very, very well is, people saying like, they're sorry, just like these are, I still stand by my views, kind of whatever, but like, these are things of how this like conversation progressed that weren't so good, and how I feel like I can do better in the future type thing. So I have seen people do this before, where it's like, they'll put something highly polarizing on their social. It blows up tons of comments, interaction, engagement. And then a few days later, they'll be like, oh my gosh, like I'm sorry about, how I responded in the comments. That was not a good look. That was childish of me, like those types of things, and like a true apology. And then the comments that people get on that kind of stuff is like, oh, wow, like that took a lot of like courage to do that, because people don't do that type of stuff usually. People, you're like, I stand by what I said, and they just want to keep like pushing their point. But if something has gone off of the rails and it does start getting devolving into that like name calling, or things that are not professional, things that are not a good look, then it might be worth it to say something like that to your audience. David, what do you think about that as far as like the apology?
It has to be authentic, right? Like, because people can easily smell when stuff isn't authentic, isn't intentional. Like I'm thinking, just because it popped up on my Facebook feed the other day, or TikTok or something, Justin Timberlake. We may all have opinions on Justin Timberlake, especially growing up in the 90s, NSYNC or whatever. Justin got in trouble for a DUI recently and came out of court, and, whole press conference and apologizing for it. Hey, just if you've had one drink, don't get behind the wheel, not worth it, and kind of talking about this stuff. And I think the general audience could tell, like, this was a part of your court sentencing that you had to come out here and say this, right? Like, this was a part of that deal. It did not feel authentic, and it probably ended up kind of having more of a negative impact than a positive one, because it wasn't authentic. It was like, I just came out of the court and I was basically required to say these things, right? Is what it came across as, or ever. So it's the same thing. If I'm not authentic, then it's not even worth trying, because it's only going to hurt you more. But yeah, if I am authentic, hey, I really did realize I didn't handle this well. I did this wrong. These are something that changed. I still believe in the things I believe in, but hey, I wouldn't have like called someone those names, or I wouldn't have gone down this like kind of conversation thread or something like that. And that usually has a very positive impact. People like transparency. People like vulnerability. People like seeing people as human or ever, and as a part of it. I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. So that's why it is really powerful when people do that, right? And once again, like we always talk about how people work with people, not faceless entities and stuff like that. So seeing someone who can either learn, grow, admit to things, like that's powerful, right? And so I think that's one of the best ways you can handle it. If something is public, something is kind of blown up a little bit, is really approaching it in that manner, and you can turn a negative into a positive, very much so. So yeah,
and what that does is actually builds a ton of goodwill with your audience. And it can really turn that around as far as being a positive way where people actually do start. They're probably like, you do something like that, you're going to have people reaching out to you in direct message for sure. Like, oh, wow, like that, again, like that took a lot of courage, or I really admire that you did that, or that you said those things. And it really speaks to your character, authenticity, and people want to work with people that they feel genuinely connected with, that they feel like they have an authentic connection with. So that's absolutely a way that you can turn that around. So David, like some of this is kind of like towing the line a little bit. I know like humor, for one, is an example that people use quite a bit of humor. How can you sort of like judge what's crossing the line versus sort of like towing the line and your audience's tolerance for the content that you're posting?
I think it's pretty tough, right? Like, especially when it comes to humor, because I mean, people have different ways to kind of handle humor, how they respond to it. That's why like certain comedians people love, certain ones hate, and it's kind of like, hey, some people like a little bit darker comedy, some people don't want to touch that at all. And so it's the same thing with like, with that, it is going to toe the line naturally a little bit on it. And if I don't know my audience, now if I know my audience, like, because I've been doing posts for a long time, I know how they generally react to things or whatever. And all of a sudden, if I start seeing like super negative reaction to something I posted, then I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I might have gone across the line because my audience doesn't normally respond this way, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one thing you tell is kind of based on initial responses. And if some of those are some of the very first ones and quickly coming in, hey, I probably went across the line without knowing about it. But if I'm getting just kind of, hey, laughs and kind of comments back and other memes going back and forth, then it's, I'm usually fine right at that point, right? And so I think it's kind of hard to tell before you post it exactly what might be crossing it or not. You might want to get a second opinion for someone before you post it if you're super concerned. But usually in humor, you get a little more leeway than you do in that post that's not coming from a humor perspective. And that you usually don't get a lot of leeway, and people like to almost assume or push it towards one way or the other at that point. So I find humor is a little bit easier just to get some interaction, some engagement, maybe even a little bit of a conversation going and stuff. So that's why I prefer it, is it's people don't get quite as heated over something from a humor perspective.
Yeah. I also like asking questions. So kind of like one of my favorite ones that I saw from the debate was like, I didn't watch the debate, who won? So you're like asking your audience a question like, yeah, the comments could get a little heated. You might have to do some moderation there, but you yourself, you're staying neutral with the question like that, but you time that with, the timing of the debates. You easily get hundreds of comments on that style of post where people are kind of just like going back and forth and sharing their opinions. So that type of content that's more focused, either like humor, that's not, again, you want to really make sure that you're avoiding any content that is like making fun of like people, things that are kind of like humorous as far as ideas, concepts, are usually pretty safe. And then asking questions like that where you're not like taking a side either way, but you're kind of like asking your audience or polling your audience. And then educational style content where you're providing education, that can be very helpful and also really establish you as that authority, a trusted advisor, which is ultimately what we want on social media. And why some of these things can ultimately damage your brand if the things like the negativity and the making fun or using these like really like, the hyperboles that we talked about, all of those things basically damage you as like your authority. So what we don't want to do is have anything where people look at you like, oh, they're not an expert in their area, because you're using things that are kind of eroding your trust and your credibility. When you start like, name calling people, for example, or the conversation really devolves into name calling. But when you're providing education, you're providing value, that helps continue to solidify you as an authority and a trusted source for information, which is really, really key.
And I would say it's not even so much of like, hey, should I talk about politics or not? it's kind of how do I more effectively and constructively handle content or a controversial topic in regards to social, right? If I am going to approach a controversial topic, whether it's politics or a really controversial issue or some of the other areas and stuff there, how do I maybe discuss this in a manner that's more constructive, positive, leads to good discussions and stuff, versus in a manner that leads to negative and kind of has the opposite effect that I'm intending, right? So I think that's all of that means is, is having people be a little bit more mindful, a little more demure with what they're posting or what they're commenting. So just think about when I'm posting something, it's not necessarily like, oh, don't post or talk about this, but the way in which I'm approaching it, right? So think about that for your content, right? Most of our content we're talking about, we maybe don't have to dive that deep in thought over like the approach to it, but especially when it comes to these types of things, like take just a couple seconds and think about how I'm going to approach it, right? And how can I make this positive? How can I make this reflect well on me? How can I, yes, get engagement, but in a manner that reflects well as a part of this, especially if I'm using social as a business tool and I am getting clients, referral partners, and people from that and building my brand. So how do I have that reflect well on the brand? So that's one more thing talking about. The answer is not yes or no. It's a maybe. Yeah. All right. And that's what we're kind of discussing. Otherwise, this would have been a much shorter live and we've just been like, no, live is done. There you go. Don't talk about politics. Right. And so that would have been as interesting or I think as helpful live. Right. So kind of recapping, like, can you use engagement from political posts without risking your brand? Yes, but there's very specific kind of ways of how you would go about that, right? Without crossing the line and having it be productive. What types of content should agents absolutely avoid if they want to protect their brand? And what we talked about, negative, name calling, mean, complaints, negativity, making fun of people, things like that, all is not going to have a positive outcome with any of that. Focusing around audience polls and questions, like Elle said, I didn't watch the debate, who won, right? That way, if I can be neutral, but get a lot of engagement coming from both sides, they don't know which way I lean, but I still get a lot of engagement and activity, and that ends up helping me as well as a part of it. So playing that neutral fence can be great, and also can lead to some really good discussions when the initial starting point is neutral versus already one direction or other. And then educational content. I think this is the biggest thing here, is if we can take an educational approach, how certain things or policies or changes, whether it's based on the candidate or just in general on government, even local government and stuff, might affect your clients without necessarily endorsing or criticizing politicians on that, and focusing on that education and neutral language, and then highlighting stories over opinions, right? And so share those stories, case studies that resonate with your audience, focus on the human element rather than the political alignment. Right. So at the end of the day, we're all humans. Well, at least I think most of us are humans, right? Yeah. So that's the whole thing, is we want to focus on that human element, right?